Hey, Bible nerds, this is Dr. Manny Arango. Welcome to the Bible Department podcast powered by Arma. We are walking through the entire Bible in a year. You can go to the description or thebibledepartment.com to download a reading plan and join the journey. First of all, if you have stuck with us for all these 52 days, number one, you're on a streak. Number two, I'm proud of you. Okay, we are diving into 1 Peter. Now, the reason that we put the books of Mark and 1st and 2nd Peter all together on our Bible reading plan is because we want to wrap our minds around the person of Peter. Okay, and Mark's gospel is given to us through the hand of Mark, but probably the lips of Peter. And so it's natural to go, okay, great. I got Mark's account of Jesus' life, which was probably told to Mark from Peter. And now let's get a sense of what Peter has to say in his epistles to the churches. Obviously, Peter almost needs no introduction. On every single list of disciples that we get throughout the entire all four gospels, they list Peter as the number one disciple. He's probably the oldest of all the disciples. There's a moment where there's a question about taxes, and Jesus says, look at the mouth of that fish. You'll get a coin for the taxes. And the only two people that have to pay the taxes are Peter and Jesus, which means that a lot of people believe that the other disciples were way younger than Jesus and Peter. We know that Peter gets transformed, or his vocation gets transformed. He goes from being a fisherman, like a blue-collar worker, to a fisher of men. But he never loses that blue-collar, working class guy, kind of rough around the edges kind of vibe. And you get that even through this epistle that we're about to dive into. So today's reading is 1 Peter chapter 1, 2, and 3. You just got 3 chapters to cover today. If you have not done the reading, this is a great place. Time out, pause, stop. Go do the reading, okay? Read 1 Peter chapters 1, 2, and 3. Come back, and everything that I'm saying will make way more sense once you've actually done the reading. All right, let's dive into our context clues. Here's the context. There is a great fire in Rome, okay, in AD 64. This is the context that actually produces this epistle that we know of as 1 Peter. Now, Nero, most historians believe Nero is responsible for this fire. What happened is that Nero loved building projects. My man loved new buildings that were most times dedicated to him, built by him. But there came an issue in Rome right around the mid-60s, is that he ran out of places to build buildings. And so most historians believe that Nero secretly sets a fire to Rome so that it would burn down so he could continue with his building campaign. Now, you're going to realize why this fire is such a big deal. It starts on July 18th. Okay, of 64 AD, and goes all the way to July 23rd. Okay, so imagine a massive metropolitan area just burning to the ground in a 5 or 6 day period. This is a massively devastating thing in the ancient world. Rome burns to the ground. It's called the Great Fire of Rome. You can look it up if you want to. But Nero needs a scapegoat for this catastrophe. And who does he blame? He begins to blame the Christians. A lot of people are looking at Nero, and a lot of people are suspicious. They think, maybe Nero did this. Instead of fessing up, Nero just says, no, the Christians did it. They actually have all this doctrine about burning in hell. They're the kind of people who would do this. And then all these other things about Christians begin to surface, like they're cannibals. So in the first century, this is the rumor, okay? They're cannibals. You know, they eat the body of their leader during their services, and they drink the blood of their leader during their services. And not only that, man, they're also involved in incest, okay? Because they call each other brother and sister, and they greet their brothers and sisters with a kiss. And they have these odd gatherings. Now, up until 64 AD, Christianity is what would be called in the Roman world a permitted religion. Why is that? Because the Romans believed that this is just a sect of Judaism, and Judaism was a permitted religion. And so, based on the umbrella of Judaism, Christians were free to practice Christianity. 64 AD, where Nero turns his sights to the church and begins to persecute the church. This begins a persecution that is going to last off and on for the next 200 years throughout the Roman Empire. So, Peter is living in Rome at, at this time, okay? At the very, very end of the letter, you'll see that it's written, this is 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 13, that this letter is written from Babylon. Now, Babylon, even if you read John's Revelation, is really a moniker for Rome, that Rome is the new Babylon. Okay, so Rome is just going to get called Babylon. There's no historical record of Peter actually being in literal Babylon. And so he's in Rome. We have like historical data that Peter not only is in Rome, but eventually dies at the hands of Nero in Rome. Here we go. The context clue, okay, is that this fire that is probably started by Nero then begins to launch. And remember, like, this is context, okay? Remember, up until this point, the only people who were really persecuting Christians were Jews, okay? Remember, Judaizers, there are people from Jerusalem that are persecuting. When Paul would go into cities, there are Jewish people who believe in Judaism, like ethnic Jews, who are persecuting Paul, okay? So this persecution is actually the first time that we're going to see persecution, not just from the Jews, okay, who have a religious issue with Christianity, but from Romans, from the Greco-Roman world that has a bigger issue with Christians. And the bigger issue is going to be they believe in treating slaves like respectable human beings, and they believe that wives have equal footing with their husbands, and they believe all kinds of countercultural things. And so the Roman world is now launched into persecution because of a lie that Nero tells, that these Christians are responsible for burning Rome down. But then the more that the Roman world begins to peer in to what it is these Christians believe, the Romans are now going to have cause to persecute the Christians because they are preaching that there is someone who is Lord, and that person is not Caesar. That person is not Nero. That person is not Julius or Augustus or Domitian. That person is Jesus. And if Jesus Christ is Lord, that means Caesar is not. And they have a countercultural ethic. And because they stand for something that is at odds with a Roman way of life, the Romans are going to continue to persecute Christians. And Peter has a lot to say. Okay, so that's our context clue. Let me move to our nerdy nugget. And then I want to spend the bulk of our time today on our timeless truth. Let's get to our nerdy nugget, okay? Peter is actually talking to Gentiles, okay? In the majority of this letter, this letter is written to Gentiles. You can see in chapter 1, verse 1, who he's talking to. Elect exiles of the dispersion. Now, that is going to sound like he's talking to Jews, because it's going to sound like he's talking to dispersed Jews or the Jewish diaspora. But throughout the whole letter, Paul is actually going to talk to Gentiles with Jewish verbiage or Jewish titles. And so he says, to the elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. All of these places are regions in Asia Minor, which would be current day Turkey. And so because of this persecution, Christians have fled. They are dispersed. This is why Peter is calling them the exiles of the dispersion. They've exiled, they've run away, they have fled persecution, but persecution is going to follow them. There's no way to get around that. And so the whole letter is actually really like a massive appeal to these Christians to keep the faith and to suffer well And there's really, I would say, a theology of suffering found within the pages of First Peter. Let's stick with our nerdy nugget for a second. Peter's talking to Gentiles, and we know that because of verses like chapter 1, verse 14. Okay, it says this: as obedient, he's talking to the recipients of the letter, and he's saying, as obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. Okay, Jews were not in former ignorance. That would be Gentiles that would have led lifestyles of former ignorance. Look at verse 18, same chapter. Knowing that you were transferred from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers. Okay, the Jewish forefathers would not fit the bill on this one. Not with perishable things, but silver or gold. And then last, 1 Peter 4, chapters 3 and 4. 1 Peter chapter 4, which is a part of our reading for tomorrow, but it gives us insight on who Peter's actually talking to. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 3 says, for the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. With respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same food of debauchery, and they malign you. Okay, so Gentiles would never be inviting Jews to participate with them in debauchery. Okay, so all these context clues tell us Peter's writing to Gentiles. However, Peter starts saying things like this to this group of Gentiles, okay? This is actually one of the most beautiful passages of Scripture. This is chapter 2, verse 9. It says this: but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you might proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Peter is going to use all of these Jewish terms, okay, there we go, and appropriate them to Christians who are not Jewish, but that are Gentile. This is like the root. This is foundational for New Testament theology when it comes to, like, are we the true Israel? Are we a replacement for Israel? No. Actually, Peter would just agree with Paul. No, you've been grafted in. There's this wild olive tree, and God has taken branches that are not native to this tree and actually grafted them into this tree. You are now a holy nation. You can claim as yours all of the terms that God used for his people in the Old Testament. You're a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a chosen race. I need you to see how fundamental this is for the identity formation of the church. Peter is saying, you no longer, Israel is no longer just Israel based on circumcision or keeping the Sabbath or dietary food restrictions, but Israel is Israel because of the circumcision of the heart. And now Gentiles, your nationality and your ethnicity and that stuff doesn't just come from your families of origin. No, you now get grafted into this heritage that is Jewish. But you don't have to ethnically be Jewish in order to access that. You access that by faith. And you identify now. You're a chosen race. Can you imagine, like, hearing these words from a Jew named Peter? You're a chosen race. It's like, the Gentile race? No. You're part of this chosen race called Jews. The reality is that for Paul and for Peter, they didn't see Christians as a replacement for Israel. They saw Gentiles who are not ethnically Jewish as the fulfillment of Judaism. That those who accept Jesus as Messiah are not replacing ethnic Israel, but they are actually fulfilling the promise that God made to Abraham. What if I told you that what you're learning in this video was just the tip of the iceberg? The Bible department is actually powered by Arma. What is Arma? I'm so glad you asked. Arma is an online subscription-based platform that we designed to help people, everyday people, learn the Bible for themselves. We started Arma so that anybody, anywhere could have access to trustworthy and entertaining Bible and theology content. In addition to this podcast, we have over 60 courses on individual books of the Bible, on theology topics, and on some hot topics like homosexuality, tithing, and women in ministry. But really, Arma is a community of people that I've gotten to know, a community where thousands of people are currently finding family, asking questions, and nerding out on the Bible together. If you want a community to read the Bible with you this year, or if you want to dive into some deeper theological content, or if you want more exclusive access to me and the entire Arma team, how about you go to thebibledepartment.com. I'll be sure to post the link in the description of this video. Let's make this your year to become a Bible nerd. That's my nerdy nugget. And then last, here's our timeless truth. And I got to do this quick. Paul is going to give 4 keys that outline a theology of suffering. Number 1, suffering tests the genuineness of your faith. You can see this in chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. It says this, "In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold, that perishes though it is tested by fire." He's saying, hey, the suffering, this persecution, hey, know that it's testing by fire the genuineness of your faith. And that's good. So moments of trial, seasons of suffering, they're actually testing whether or not you have faith in Jesus because you're going to go to heaven when you die, or because God blesses you, or are you willing to suffer for this thing called Christianity? Number 2, it gives Christians an opportunity to follow in the footsteps of Jesus, who suffered for us. This is 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21 is where this idea can be found. "For to this you have been called," this suffering, you have been called, "because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps." So I don't just follow in the steps of Jesus' life, I follow in the steps of his death. I suffer. And he's saying, hey, it's the Romans who are persecuting you, and you need to be winning Romans. They're the same way that Jesus had actual enemies and died for them. You need to not see the Roman world as your enemies, but you need to see the people who are leading you into the Colosseum, feeding you to lions, persecuting you. You need to see that you're going to follow in the footsteps of Jesus and win the very people who hate you. Okay? So that's the second piece of this theology of suffering, is that this gives Christians an opportunity to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. Number 3, it is a message of hope to the outside world. Go to chapter 2, verse 12. Peter is going to tell Christians, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable. Hey, don't give them any extra reasons to persecute you. Don't break the law. Imagine this. It is Nero who's actually behind the persecution. And this is what Peter says: be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be the emperor as supreme or the governors. Okay, so submit to like governing authorities, even though they're persecuting you. Third, suffering and hardship is an inevitable part of life. How we respond says a lot about us. You can see this in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 17. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. Said, hey, people suffer for all kinds of reasons. There are people who suffer because they did evil. There's people who suffer because they do good. There are people who suffer because life just is life. Be on the right side of suffering. If you're going to suffer, which everybody is, at least suffer for doing the right thing. A lot of teaching during this time period would say, if you're doing the right thing, you're not going to suffer. And Peter goes on and says, no. Actually, I watched Jesus suffer for doing the right thing. I am suffering for doing the right thing. And if you're going to suffer, how about you be a light to the Gentile world? How about you follow in the footsteps of Jesus? How about you let this suffering test the genuineness of your faith? And last but not least, Since suffering is inevitable, how about you take this season like a good soldier? All right, I gave you some context clues. I made sure I gave you a nerdy nugget, and I made sure to give you a timeless truth. All four of those elements that Peter's teaching through this epistle, all four of those are timeless truths for us as believers today. I'll see you right here tomorrow for day 53. We're going to finish up the book of First Peter. And I'm proud of you. I'll see you tomorrow. Love you guys. Peace. Thanks so much for joining us on the Bible Department podcast. If this episode was helpful, how about you leave a comment, share with a friend, and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. To learn more about the show, head to thebibledepartment.com. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.